book finally answers the question, what would happen if you put Garak and Madrid in a room together? I think we all wanted to know. Hello interwebs, I hope you're all doing well, and I am here to review not the latest Star Trek novel release, but the second most recent Star Trek novel release, this one titled Star Trek The Next Generation Pliable Truths. So I was actually, if you were checking out earlier on this channel, I reviewed the last book in the Star Trek novel series, Star Trek Lost to Eternity, and really love that. Check out the review for that. But I did realize as I was doing that I forgot to review Pliable Truths because it came out around the time that my movie Identities released, and I had zero time to sit down and actually do a review of it, despite liking this novel quite a bit. By the way, I should say this is by Dayton Ward, author who I really enjoy in the Star Trek novelverse. But this is a really, really fun concept for a Star Trek The Next Generation novel, because as you can kind of tell by the cover here, what this is kind of a Star Trek The Next Generation Deep Space Nine crossover to a degree. It kind of feels like the missing Star Trek episode that we never got, set between Star Trek Chain of Command, the episode where Picard gets captured by the Cardassians and is tortured by Madrid, and the pilot episode of Deep Space Nine Emissary, where Enterprise D is already at Deep Space Nine. Sisko arrives there to take over the station and sets off the events of that show. It never felt like there was anything necessarily missing, but there did feel like there was supposed to be some connective tissue between those two episodes that we never really got. Because if you look into the history of the Star Trek, spin-off into Deep Space Nine, Chain of Command really was supposed to be the direct setup for Deep Space Nine. In fact, I even think it was supposed to be set. I originally set after the pilot episode of Deep Space Nine, but because of airtimes, they had to move things around. And so I might be misremembering that. But there was a little bit more supposed connective tissue between those two episodes that was supposed to happen, but just for one thing or another, it didn't directly happen. And so there was obviously a connection between the Cardassians there and the pullout of Bajor that we see at the beginning of Deep Space Nine. And so I think that this episode does a really great job of exploring how we got from A to B and giving us a little bit more in-depth look into what happened on the actual planet Bajor, as well as to the many Bajorans who have been taken off of Bajor and brought into Cardassian territory after the Cardassians decided to pull out of Bajor. And gives us a little bit more look into the politics of all that. Because, as much as I love Deep Space Nine, and I love Deep Space Nine delving into a lot of the politics of stuff, we never got to see too much of that element of things. We got to see Bajor, the planet, post-pullout of the Cardassians, and we got to see the Cardassian Union itself dealing with, its sort of decline after the events of Next Generation, as well as leading into the Dominion War. But we never really got to see the messy political turmoil of them pulling out in the first place, because that had to have been just a chaotic mess when you have someone who has been occupying a planet illegally for decades and doing horrific things, and what's going to happen there. And I think one of the more interesting aspects of the novel is that it deals with the Bajorans who've been taken as slaves that we kind of got little hints of here and there in Deep Space Nine, but presumably, as we saw in that show, the Cardassians had agreed to return all Bajoran nationals, which they obviously lied about and did not do. And we're also trying to cover up some atrocious atrocities that they did within Cardassian space, not just on Bajor. And so we get here a mining camp of Bajorans who have been used as slave labor, kind of dealing with the fact of realizing, the Cardassians pulled out, they've agreed to return us, but they're not. And why is that? Why are they lying about our location and not letting the Federation or others know that they still have us and are using us, and maybe even plan to kill all of us to be able order to hide what they were doing here? And them working as a sort of like a resistance group to try to contact and get help during all the politics going on. So that's a really interesting setup right on its face. But the other really interesting element of this is we have Captain Picard going to Deep Space Nine to begin negotiations to start this political process of pulling out a Bajor, ultimately leading to what we see in Deep Space Nine, which is the Federation becoming kind of a stabilizing force within the region as Bajor gets on its feet, and sort of setting up the events of that show. So this is the negotiations to get that. But what is particularly fascinating about this moment in time in the story is that Picard, as we know in Chain of Command, had just been deeply tortured. And, in Next Generation, it was an episodic show, so it never really dealt with much ramifications of the mental strain on characters like Picard for something as deep and painful and traumatic as that. We got some elements of it with the Borg in episodes like Home, but not really with Picard's torture, which in many ways feels like it would have been just as deeply profound and painful for him. So we're dealing with Picard sort of reeling from that, having to again deal with the Cardassians. And not only that, Gul Madrid himself is one of the people that he is negotiating with for across the negotiation table, which is a fantastic setup for some spicy, juicy drama, as Picard has to sort of go to bat against the man who tortured him and try to hold his own while also still having his trauma very fresh in his mind. So all of that is just a lot of fun, and I think the book does a really great job of depicting the mental strain that Picard's going through and trying to hold it together and trying to have that strong, confident exterior that Patrick Stewart so wonderfully portrays when he is dealing with so much internally, and Deanna Troi obviously being there to help guide him. I think Dayton just did a great job delving into that aspect of Picard, a side of him we don't often get to see, a vulnerable side of him we don't also get to see, very often get to see. The other few aspects of the novel that I did like is that while we don't get Sisko, because he is still, on, I believe he's at Utopia Planitia during the events of this before he transfers over to Deep Space Nine, we do get a lot of other Deep Space Nine characters who are still around the station. So we get someone like Odo, we get Kira, we get Garak, who is particularly fun in this novel and is right there on the cover. As I kind of joked about at the top, we do get to see him butt heads with Gul Madrid, which is just an interesting pairing, one that I would have actually loved to see in the show proper. We never got to see. So to see Gul Madrid and Garak kind of go head to head, I think was really, really interesting. And just getting to see our characters from Deep Space Nine before we meet them, like Kira still being a little bit more of even more of a angry, just out of the resistance person at this moment, because she's been fighting for years, decades, her entire life against the Cardassian oppressors, and now they're leaving, and now she has to sort of transition to a more leadership role. And we got to see elements of that throughout seasons 1 and 2 of Deep Space Nine, even further throughout the show. But here she doesn't even have Sisko to be sort of an antagonistic force as we saw in season 1, and a stabilizing friendship that she gets later on. Here she's just kind of on her own in this role, and I found that to just be a really interesting place for Kira that we never really get to see, where she's post, our occupation, yet pre sort of the Federation. And it's just a really cool aspect of that. The other element of the story is there's a small B story here involving Miles O'Brien and sort of his delving into his decision to choose to go to Deep Space Nine, because at the beginning of Deep Space Nine we just sort of learned that O'Brien has been transferred to Deep Space Nine, and we don't really see if that was something that he requested, if it's something that he was just ordered to do. And so this book sort of delves into that and what led O'Brien to choose to leave the flagship of the fleet and go over to Deep Space Nine, where we all know he faced some of the most horrific torture that a man could ever experience. So we get to sort of see what led him to that horrific decision on his part, but certainly great for all of us who love our Union man O'Brien. So that was just a fun aspect to get to see a little bit of him and his relationship with Keiko and the choices that were made there. Trying to think if there's anything else. Like I said, I read this a couple of months ago, so it's been a hot minute. But those are the things that stuck on my mind. I think this is a really fun book. Like I said, it's a great connected book between Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, sort of a lost missing episode crossover between those two. So if you're ever interested, a little bit of a prequel to Deep Space Nine, but some of the characters of that, but with your Next Generation crew members, some really great fallout from some classic Next Generation episodes. Highly recommend this book to you. Really fantastic work by Dayton Ward, and I'd highly recommend it. With all that said, I hope you enjoy the book, and with that, I hope y'all live long and prosper, my friends.